Hello everyone. I can tell you I spent a week with a 32Bn Recce wing on a farm in the Kalahari, and a lot of videos came out of that one. And we had some fantastic times to see these people together after 40 years and more, and just picking it up, roaring with laughter, standing around, discussing the old days. Man, it was fantastic, even because Crocodile was there. And yeah, we're going to get this video out to you soon, just hanging there. But today we have two very special fellows, Kevin FitzGerald and Joe Santa Clara. Now, they both were at the Recce wing of 32 Battalion. And this is a bit different because Fritz is sort of interviewing Joe. I was just standing there. So it's something which we tested out, and I think it worked well. And they spoke about a whole bunch of things. It was really interesting to hear them and to see them interacting with each other. So here's another Jew. Let us see what the two of them are up to.
My name is Kevin FitzGerald. Thank you for inviting us on, because I served as a sergeant in the 32 Battalion Recce Group from late 1978 through to the end of 1981. In that time, I got to meet our guest, Joe Santa Clara, and Joe will introduce himself, and then I will continue with the interview after that.
I'm Joe Santa Clara. I served at 32 Battalion in Mahoney from 1980, October 1980 to July 1982.
Joe, you came through to C2 via the Parabats in Bloemfontein. You volunteered to go on the Parabats course, and at some point you made a decision to transfer across to C2. Would you mind explaining to us and enlightening us as to what motivated you to move from the Parabats across to C2 Battalion?
Yes. So we were busy with basics, and we were very close to the PT course, and of course the PT course looming ahead. Our PT instruction intensified, and we were doing PT drills, and I happened to look up, and behind our barracks I saw these guys who were dressed in clothes that were very foreign to me, extremely foreign. I thought they were from another country. I then carried on with the exercises, and that evening I couldn't forget that, and I walked out back to the barracks, to the section, and I called, and I happened to see one of the black soldiers, and I called him across and tried to speak to him in English, because I obviously didn't know what language they were, and he was and I realized he was Portuguese, because I am Portuguese myself. I started to speak to him in Portuguese, and he briefly told me where he was from. And while he was doing this, a white 32 Battalion member, who I still don't remember who it was, walked out and called him and said to him, "Anda cá, anda cá," means in Portuguese means "come here, you can't speak to these people. Stick with us." And I left. But by then I'd already known who these people are, and this worked with me for at least 5, 6, 7 days. Then just as PT course started, I went to my commanding, my company commander, and I said to him, "Listen, I don't want to do this anymore. I've made up my mind. I want to go to 32. He says, "Well, who's 32? He knew full well who 32, because they were training on his base. And he says, "How do you know about them?" I didn't elaborate, and I said, "I've made up my mind, I do want to leave." And he then turned around to me and said to me, "Jy sal spring, al sit jy ek jou op my rug, en gaan jy saam spring, want jy is Portugees, jy is die enigste Portugees wat kan die eerste wat kan Portugees praat in ons company." And I said to him, "There's no ways I'm doing this." Cut a long story short, he said to me, "If you do leave, you will be RTU'd, and you don't want to be RTU'd." And I said, "I'll take those chances. I'm volunteering to go to 32. I've made up my mind." They did, in fact, Artie. They sent me back to Ladysmith, where I originally was stationed. Arrival at Ladysmith, I think I was there for 10 days, and I was called up to 32. Upon arrival in Rundu, I was called in with 5 other guys, and we were called into this, I suppose at the time it could be called an ops room. It was a huge map of Southwest Africa, and an RSM walked in and he started to advise us as to what this place was about. And he mentioned that there were 3 bases: the Rundu one we were at, then there was the Buffalo, and the Amoni where the reconnaissance unit was stationed. Once
Joe, I wonder, before you commence on your time at 32 and your career at 32, if you could perhaps go back to your family origins. You mentioned that you're actually Portuguese, and I wonder if you could give us a bit of background on how you actually came to arrive in South Africa, where you had been prior to your arrival back in South Africa. You could give us a bit of a background on your personal family history.
Okay, so when I matriculated in 78, my father was transferred to live in Brazil, in São Paulo, and the South African Defence Force gave my father, he allowed him to take me for 2 years, maximum 2 years, but I would have to report back for duty or to serve my conscription after 2 years. I then started to work in Brazil, and I was doing a fair amount of traveling, and in March 1980, I got a knock on the door at our family home, and the ambassador, the vice ambassador was there, and she said to me, "You are now under arrest." I got the shock of my life because I didn't realize what was going on, and she said, "Do you remember, you made a promise, your dad made a promise that you're going to be back in South Africa. You were allowed out for 2 years and no more." And I said that we would like your passport because you now, I don't know if they use the word conscientious objector, but you now wanted. And with that, I was just starting the most amazing career, and I said, it is what I have to do, and I came back to South Africa, and I landed at Jan Smuts, and within 14 days I was on the train to Ladysmith.
Okay, Joe, your early family history before you came to South Africa, was it not in Mozambique?
No, my parents originate from Mozambique. My mother was from the north in Kiliman area, and my dad was from Lorenzo Marx. But when they married, they moved to Rhodesia, and I was born in Salisbury. And my dad, being a railway shunter, we went from town to town and landed up in northern Rhodesia, where my sister was born. And then we moved down to South Africa in 1964, and I became a South African citizen in 1964.
So Joe, you had a rather interesting early family history, and made a rather interesting choice as well to go through to C2. I wonder if you could pick up the story again when you were being briefed by the Sergeant Major at Rundu HQ.
Yeah, so this is quite funny because I came back from Brazil and I really wanted to have an adventure because I had nothing to lose. I'd given up my life there, so I might as well start an adventure here. And the Sergeant Major told us that I go back to the 3 bases, and he said, "Look,
Joe, I wonder if I might interrupt. Would you recall the name of the Sergeant Major that briefed you? Could it have been Sergeant Major Rosa?
I think it was Sergeant Major Rosa. Yes, 1980. I think it was him. And he started with Rundu, and he said, "We need a translator," because I was sent up as a translator. That's I'd forgotten that part. A talk, and he said to me, or he said to us, "We need 2 guys in Rundu. We need 2 guys in Buffalo." And he mentioned the word. It's going to be like a holiday camp. And he said, "We've got a Maoni reconnaissance group," and he says that's in Sector 10, the most dangerous area. So the 5 guys, the 6 of us, I didn't say anything, but they were fighting for Buffalo, obviously. And so they settled amongst themselves who was going to Buffalo, and they didn't want to go to Amoni, so they were to almost draw straws for Rundu, and then one of the guys was lumbered with me, and we went to volunteered for Amoni.
Okay, so Joe, you opted to go to Amoni.
Yes.
Really on the description that the Amoni was in a dangerous place, and that's
Yes.
where you wanted to go.
Yes.
Okay. So you now left Rundu and you proceeded to Amoni, to the Recce group at Amoni.
Yes.
If you could continue your journey from that point.
Yes, and this is where I got a shock and I wondered if I'd made the right decision. Upon arrival in Amoni, we were, the two of us were swamped, including some of the SP troops. We were swamped by what we thought were senior leaders. In fact, some of them were senior leaders. And they started the initiation process. And then I didn't want to be there anymore.
Okay, Joe, if I may, the initiation process was unique to Amoni. And in fact, in some cases, it was so severe that it was actually reported as an ambush to the HQ, or it wasn't actually, sorry, it never got reported as an ambush, but somehow or another, on one occasion, DHQ in Pretoria became aware that an incident had occurred in Amoni. They contacted C2 headquarters in Rundu and asked why this had never been reported. Rundu then got hold of us, and we very sheepishly had to advise Rundu HQ, no, it was just an initiation process. So it was actually a wonderful way of welcoming new members into Amoni, not only of the Recce group, but anybody that was going to be involved in Amoni. It was what may have appeared to be on the surface a rude awakening into the combat zone, but it's actually quite harmless and it was just great fun.
Indeed, but during that time, I have to confess, I thought this was the real deal, and I didn't want to be there anymore. But we got through it, and after about, I don't remember whether it's 10 or 14 days, probably about 10 days, I was approached and said, right, this is, you guys can now proceed and do your job, but Joe, we don't know what to do with you, you're a talk, we don't know what to do with you. So I said, well, that's cool. Let me just walk around and see. I'll make something of this. And in doing so, I walked around the base, spoke to some of the troops, because obviously I speak their language fluently. And I realized that very few of them could speak English. And I went to our base, Sergeant Major Piet van Eerden, and I asked him if I could, I'd seen a tent in the rear, near the ammunition, the Manasi, and I said, could I have that tent and start teaching these guys English? And he said to me, look, I don't know what to do, just do what you want. And I did. And the Recce group at that particular time were not stationed on the base. The majority of them had gone on operations. And after about a week or so of lecturing these guys, and I'm not a teacher, I just thought I needed to do something. And after about a week or two, this long gentleman walked in with broken glasses, and he asked me what I was doing. And he introduced himself. And I must be honest, I shook in my boots, or in my pluckies, because we were allowed to, because we had special dress code in Amoni. And he said to me, look, I need to speak to you, let me just sort something else out and I'll call for you. With that, I promptly was marched into the ops room, and he said to me, look, I like your initiative, you don't want to sit around and do nothing, I need to do something with you. And I'd like, would you consider being a radio operator or a signaller? And he said, what do you know about signals and radios? And I said, zero. I'm just an infantry guy. I don't know anything else, foot soldier. And he said, we'll make something of you. And with that, we had signallers on the base, but they were going to be flying out within 6 and 12 months from when I arrived. And they started to train me. And I think I got excellent training. And then by that time, when the Recce group were there, Sergeant FitzGerald and Peter Williams, he was a sergeant at the time, they were giving me a lot of support. They supported me, and they helped me with the radios. Lieutenant Rutte at the time, gave me a lot of support. And I think within 2 to 3 months, I was ready to run the radio. I could do a session in the ops room by myself, and I did. They put me on night shift. I did my night shift, and I think about 6 weeks later, Lieutenant Rutter came back to me and he said to me, I think we need to get you a little bit more advanced now, and we need you to do Morse code.
Now, Joe, with that statement of intent by Willem, you then commenced to do Morse code. Now, the reason that Morse code is such an effective communications medium is that it does not have an undulating sound wave. It is a flat sound wave.
Mm-hmm.
And it is known in the signals world as CW, constant wave communication, because it's merely a blip. So there's no undulation, no distortion. So Morse code communication in the days that preceded digital was the most effective way for clandestine forces to communicate. So we used Morse code. We were all trained in Morse code. We were all required, I think, to be able to receive 20 words a minute. It wasn't just about sending, because we also had to receive instructions and communicate with one another. So we, the reconnaissance group in C2, were Morse code proficient. And so Joe commenced his training to become Morse code proficient because he was not going to be spending his days behind a radio at a moaning. He was going to go and become our ops radio operator. Joe, will you give us a bit more about your path forward, your Morse code training, and what happened from that point onwards?
Yes, so the Morse code training, Lieutenant Rutt at the time, he took care of that. And I could not become an ops signaller until I could do receive 25 letter syllables per minute. And I had to send at least 16 to 20, but we managed with a lot of effort, because this was all very new to me. And Lieutenant Rutt used to wake me up at 2, 3 in the morning and say, right, come, let's test you again and again and again. And I think within a short period of time, 5 to 6 weeks, I'd gotten to the point that we needed to get. And Sergeant Kevin Sido actually approached me and he said to me, look, I think let's just give you another test, because Lieutenant Rutt, I think, had been out off the base. And I passed. And once I passed, I was now able to go and commence my duties as an operational signaller for the reconnaissance group. Once I did that, I then had to be taught the protocols, the reconnaissance group protocols, because I obviously did not know about this. I'm not a trained reconnaissance operator, so I had to learn from scratch as well. And and I had to remain a national, because I was a national service, and I had to remain a national serviceman. I was not a PF member, and I had to learn a lot very quickly. These guys were extremely operational, they were very knowledgeable, and they worked fast. So you had to catch up to them, and you had to keep up with them in whatever form or format that they would prepare their operation.
Now, Joe, can you discuss some of the operations that you went on and your experiences being operating with us, the kind of operation that we did, and the impact that it had on you, and opening up a new world to you of special force operations?
Yes, I have to confess that initially I again had to question my motives for going to this, to coming to 3-2, and then also joining the reconnaissance unit, Mahoney, because we are humans and we have fear. And when I was told to get dressed into the whatever kit needed to be worn at that particular operation, I asked myself again, what on earth am I doing and what the hell am I doing? But I went out and I knew I was with one of the best, or with the best. And the group I'd become close to the group, which I think that is what made the whole situation so much easier for me. The entire Recce group seemed to have embraced, or not embraced me, but accepted me, and I became their signaller, and I started to operate with them. And the operations we started to do was the local operations in vehicles, and we drove the operations. Some of them were 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks. I think the longest one I did with the reconnaissance group was about 13 to 14 weeks. Living with them, and we would cross border all the time. So yes, it was amazing. And the more I did it, the easier it became. I was a lot more relaxed, and I lived for this. I started to live for this. I really enjoyed it.
Now, Joe, you speak of how, when you arrived there, how welcome we made you, and how we embraced your choice. And in doing that, we commenced and made effort to train you. How did you feel about being a relative outsider and be so welcomed and so trained up by us so quickly and so enthusiastically?
I was shocked. I never ever expected to get this. I didn't expect it.
Now, I'd like you to understand why that was. You can do as much selection as you want to. Selection is not physical. Selection is mental and attitude. And what we look for in people is people with the right attitude. Have they got the drive, the willingness, the discipline to persevere? You cannot give that to people. That is within people. So we don't look for physical characteristics. I think there's a misconception. Everybody talks about how big these guys are and this and that. I started off at 5'6", and I landed up 3 years later at 5'2", because of the heavy backpacks I carried, parachuting, and all of these physical things that this kind of profession demands of you. That is not a physical thing. That is a mental thing.
Indeed.
And in you, we recognize that this person had the initiative, had the desire to want to do more than just the minimum. And that is why we embraced you, Joe. That is why we put the effort into you, because you knew in you, in your soul, was a person that wanted to rise above the minimum. So I hope that you now, perhaps 40 years later, understand what we saw in you and the value that we knew you could add to us, and us to you.
Yeah, it took a long time to realize this, and because at the time you're living in the bubble, you're not looking from the outside. You just had duties, and it was never ending. I remember the year 1981, and I think Sergeant has spoken to you, FitzGerald, about it as well. It was a very, very hectic year for the reconnaissance group, and the training, the amount of training, I was trained in every aspect that the reconnaissance team was trained in. Obviously on a more superficial level, but I understood everything that they did. I understood the language, I understood the means, and if I needed to jump in and do whatever they needed to do, I had the ability to do that.
Joe, in 1981, and I'm going to say this for the audience that are going to be watching this, 1981 was a pivotal year in the border war in Southwest Africa. For the first time, the South African Defence Force took the war to the enemy. And they mounted very aggressive operations to push the enemy further and further back from the Namibian border and further into Angola, which would have very onerous demands on an aggressive force, because it made the logistics so much more difficult. So in 1981, we had the first of the operations that would begin this process. The reconnaissance group in Sutu was tasked to carry out harassing missions in the area between the two most combat intense areas in Angola, in a town called Zengongo, to a town called Njiva. And that was known as the most intense areas in Southwest Africa. And we operated in these areas in as far west as Kahama for a period of about 5 months continuously. We harassed the enemy through personnel ambushes, base attacks, vehicle ambushes. In fact, in that period, we became the most effective ambushing unit in the history of the South African Defence Force. So we really pushed hard at SWAPO, and in the process we put the MPLA under a lot of pressure as well to not harbour SWAPO, because we hit them very, very close to MPLA camps. One case I remember very clearly was a UNITA camp that was set up at Njiva, on the airfield at Njiva, but not within Njiva town, not within the base itself. And we actually infiltrated right into the centre of that SWAPO grouping, and I think almost exterminated them. And it drove the message home to the MPLA. As long as you harbour SWAPO, as long as you have a protective umbrella arm over SWAPO, you're placing yourself in harm's way. Little did we know ourselves that there was a bigger plan about to burst over the MPLA. And they in fact would be facing a very aggressive South African force in a couple of months' time. But we pushed that message hard, and we pushed it by attacking SWAPO relentlessly. So that period in the history of the 32 Battalion Reconnaissance Group and in the broader history of the South African Defence Force was actually a pivotal period in the border war, and changed the border war from that point forever onwards. Because once Operation Protea had been completed, the SADF moved into Angola with a massive force. In fact, we were stationed in Angola. So that pushed SWAPO back massively, not by 30 or 40 kilometers, by hundreds of kilometers. So before they even crossed the Namibian border, they were in enemy territory effectively. For at least 100 kilometers, we pushed that frontier, that borderline up north, by about 100 kilometers. So Joe was involved in an incredibly productive and exciting period. And I wonder if you actually felt that, Joe, because you saw that developing.
I saw it developing, and we did the initial operations leading up to this. But I did have a lot of chats to Lieutenant Rutter, and because they were 32 Battalion or the Recce Group operations, we didn't have a TAC HQ, so on many occasions I was asked to stay behind, because then I could be the, not necessarily the TAC HQ, but because of my Morse code, I could communicate with the sticks and let them know what's going on.
If I may interject, effectively you were a communication link, which was vital.
Yes, yes, yes. And I assisted, especially with the Morse code, I assisted in the different groups or sticks in position, in letting Lieutenant Rutter know where the positions of his guy, although he knew, it was always verification, and I would work 24 hours to sit and listen and see where I could help out, and I did.
Now Joe, you had a very, very productive time with the 32 Battalion Recce Group. Could you explain to the audience what your trajectory was after that within 32?
So, if I remember, towards the middle, third quarter of 1981, I was asked to do a medics course, an extremely comprehensive medics course at Oshikati. Prior
to our deployment to north of Njiva and Zengonga, because we deployed that in around about March, and we eventually finished up, I think, at the end of July, beginning of August.
Yes.
So this was in the lead up to all of that you went on let's call it an intense medic course at Oshikati, not on Donga.
Oshikati, yeah. So we were sent to this course, and in fact I took with me 4 of the reconnaissance SB members, and we spent our, whatever the period was we needed in Oshikati, and the training was extremely intense, extremely, and I'm proud to say that the 5 of us walked out with 95% plus certificates, which now armed us with a new skill, and that's where we could now be of assistance to any South African soldier that needed assistance, and we did put it to good use.
Can you perhaps elaborate on some of those instances where you might have been exposed to combat and what you did?
The one that comes to mind is we were, I think it was in May 1982. The reconnaissance group was out of the base. They were on an operation, and Jim Savory was the acting base commander, base commander, and at about 3 o'clock that Sunday afternoon, we heard mortars falling, and obviously we all ran out. I was in the ops room, ran out, and we tried to pinpoint this, and we contacted Undangwa, we contacted Inana, we contacted Oiki, which is our outer base 15 kilometers from us, to try and pinpoint the direction of this contact. And nobody knew about this, but between us that were in the base, we actually we pinpointed a direction. And Jim said to me, "Joe, I've got one more job for you. I know you're about to finish your career, your time with us. I've got one job for you, and I need you to put together a reaction force and head out. You know the direction. You're the only person on the base that actually has worked that area, that understands what's going on." So we put together a team, and it was a pot washer, chef, all the guys. We were 3 buffels that went out.
So in other words, you're non-combat personnel.
Non-combat personnel. And we put this group together, and we left at about 4 in the afternoon, and it was a slow drive because we had to traverse direct bush. There were no roads to go on because we had a direction to hit and to drive in, and we couldn't deter from this direction. So I think that by midnight we'd only covered about 25-30 kilometers, and I was told by that time Lieutenant Rutt had come back into base, and he started to talk to me on the radio and guide me, and they sent a helicopter, a Puma, to fly above us. So our task was to find these what had happened, and to create a landing zone for the chopper in case of injuries. Just about a few minutes past midnight, I saw a huge flash on my front tire, and I thought we'd been hit by an RPG because we were very close to this contact point, and I dived off this biffle. I didn't know what hit me. It was so confusing. It's just the noise and the dust, and I sat in the bush by myself, and the guys in the vehicle behind me were lighting cigarettes and saying, "What's happening? What's going on here?" And I was convinced I was in a contact or an RPG attack. I realized, and you've got to understand that it's very dark in Angola.
Especially on a moonless night.
Especially on a moonless night. I saw my tyre had blown off, and by then my driver, who was quite experienced, SP troop, extremely experienced, came to me and said to me, "We've got a problem, our tyre's blown." I said, "That's not a problem, we can replace that." And he said, "That's not the problem." He said, "The problem, there's a line in the ground." And I knew it would have been Cortex, because obviously we trained on that there. And he said, "Come have a look at this." And there was a box, a huge box, packed with PE4, and only the corner had broken off. So this anti-personnel was supposed to set off this one over there, and it didn't. We then proceeded to repair, and a unit from 202 Battalion started to approach us, and I contacted HQ and I said, I'm hearing vehicles, I don't know what these vehicles are, and I need to know what's going on. And HQ came back to me and said to me, look, this is 202 Battalion on their way to you, we've told them where you are, wait for them and you guys can go together with them. I then met up with this group and we proceeded to search for this place. Fortunately, one of the survivors of this contact had his A72 radio, and I was able to communicate with him. But by this time, I forgot to tell you that when my vehicle hit the landmine, the chopper above me also thought I'd been hit by an RPG, and they left the area, understandably so. And I was then told to proceed, and now I had to bring whatever happened, no more helicopters available because it was too dangerous and it was at night. You can't see. And
so I wonder if I might just go back one step, please. You are making reference to a survivor of a contact that had an A72 radio. Can we make the assumption that the loud explosion that you guys had heard several hours earlier was in fact a contact, and that you people were very close without really knowing it, because you had no information on this?
Zero information.
That it had actually been a contact, and were unaware that it might have been a severe contact, and that there was only a few survivors. You were totally unaware of it at this point.
We were not aware of it.
Am I correct in that?
You are correct in that. And we were so close to this contact point. In fact, when my vehicle was into the landmine, we were probably, as the crow flies, a kilometer from the contact point. But we didn't know this because we didn't have
any idea what had happened.
No, we didn't have any idea. And I picked up this radio signal, and I realized immediately that this guy can hear us. And I asked him to. I didn't know what condition he was in. All I could hear was "Ekes geskiet, ekes geskiet." And I said to him, listen, let's guide me in. Am I on your left-hand side? Am I in front of you? Am I behind you? Where are you? And I said, stay in that position and guide me in. And if I'm on your left-hand side, just tell me to keep coming and then make me turn when you see my lights. And we got to this thing.
So this is, by this point, is it 102 Battalion?
202.
202 had joined you.
Joined us, yeah.
And you had set forth now to go and find this injured individual.
Yeah.
Okay.
We arrived at this at the spot, and I immediately deployed the troops to for protection, and we started to look to see what was going on. I met this youngster that was shot, and I immediately started my medical training on him. I injected him, got him sorted. I stabilized.
So where had he been shot?
He had been shot in the leg. But it was a severe shot. His bones were severed completely, and we started to because remember, this is now about 1 o'clock in the morning, and the contact happened probably at about 3 in the afternoon. So this guy was suffering, and we stabilized him. We put him on our vehicle, and we started to look for others, and we picked up probably another 11 dead soldiers. South African soldiers, and
So it had been a very intense, very severe contact with a large group of SWAPO?
Yes, we think it was a large group of SWAPO sweeping through, because no mortars were used. It was pure firefight, small odd fire. It was a firefight, and we picked up two. They had killed 2 insurgents, but we had lost an entire platoon, bar 1 person.
Just once again for our audience, in the South African Infantry Defence Force side of things, a platoon consisted of approximately 33 personnel, which was broken down into 3 sections. We had an HQ element, which was the 3 personnel that I referred to, of the first 30, and then 3 sections of 10 men each. And that was basically normally read by a corporal and a lance corporal.
Yes.
And then you had a lieutenant in charge of those 3 sections, which made up a platoon, and you'd have 3 3 sections, the platoon leader and his signaller, and I think a clerk.
The clerk, in this case,
Who wouldn't go on patrol, but he was part of that platoon setup, so that's where you get to 33. But actually on patrol would be 32 people, so they lost an entire section of people, which is a massive, massive and catastrophic loss.
So once we had stabilized the patient, we loaded the bodies, and we requested that 202 Battalion ride with us all the way to Ohiki, because now we're going to go along the cut line. That's how close we were to the Angolan border. We ran along the cut line, and I radioed up ahead to Elof. Anyway, so
sorry, can I ask you, is this to a signaller?
no, this was to the guy in charge of Ohiki base.
Okay.
James Elof.
May I just, Joe, just explain to our audience once again. Ohiki was the area that Joe has said to you before was northwest of our base, Amoni. It was a cattle watering point. It had a reservoir with a cattle trough and a windmill. And we used this area quite extensively for training and related activities. And the person that ran Ohiki for a very long time, we developed it over a period of time into almost permanent camp area, and Tiens Elof was the person that was in charge of Ohiki.
Thank you. Then it was an extremely slow drive. I think we left the contact zone possibly at around about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we only got to Ohiki at around 5 in the morning. Very, very slow. This chap that was shot was in extreme pain. I had to keep administering.
Joe, sorry, could you just give us an idea of the distance travelled in those 3 hours? We're talking about 20 kilometres, 30 kilometres?
About 30 kilometres.
So we're going along at about 10 kilometres an hour, which is exceptionally slow.
Yeah, exceptionally slow. Got to Ohiki, I got assistance. We had some other qualified guys to help me with this patient. Once we restabilized him, we headed south towards Mahoney, which was around about 15 kilometers. I was in constant radio contact with Mahoney and Ohiki, and Lieutenant Rutter was in fact waiting for us upon arrival. Upon arrival, we offloaded the bodies, we put them into body bags, and I in fact think that 2 of those bodies were twin brothers, if I remember correctly. And I then did my report to the base commander, and soon after that I departed on another quick ops, and then that was it.
Your time came to an end, Joe?
My time came to an end.
So by the time
that bomb.
Joe, that's quite correct, Joe. We've overlooked what actually brought you to a stop initially, and that was luckily for you, was a failed IED device. Could you explain what you guys actually did with that device?
Yes. So a reconnaissance team was put together. I was not part of that reconnaissance team because by then I was able to pinpoint exactly where this position was, and the reconnaissance team went out. If I remember correctly, Kevin Sider headed that team, and he radioed me from the side. He says, "Joe, this is a 15-kilogram box that missed you," and they exploded. They exploded they detonated this bomb, and they did a reconnaissance of the area, and they picked up one more SWAPO insurgent that had been killed by this original platoon, and loaded him up and brought him back to base as well.
Joe mentioned earlier in explaining his involvement in our deployment as the Recce group for 3-2. Our main mode of deployment was vehicle. We were also parachute trained, we were Clipper trained, we were Zodiac trained, so we could also infiltrate by air and by water. And a number of our ops, we in fact did infiltrate off water, off rivers, to blow bridges, to lay mines, and to disappear without a trace. But our primary method of infiltration was by vehicle. And we used standard South African biffles, which were nothing more than an armoured passenger cell placed on top of a Unimog chassis which had been reinforced. The drivetrain and the gears and everything were Mercedes, were Unimog. It was an incredibly powerful and incredibly bush-suitable vehicle. We also, from time to time, used Land Rovers and enemy vehicles as well, but our primary vehicle was the Buffalo. Over time, we modified these vehicles to the extent that they were incredibly efficient. They became mortar platforms for us, 14.5 platforms, and a variety of other weapons. So we attended to the cooling system. We put improved grids on the front so that leaves didn't block up and prevent airflow through to the radiator. I think we might have even modified the suspension systems. We had very strict controls. The C2 reconnaissance group was a highly disciplined group of people, and we were expected to adhere to a very high standard of soldiering. So we were very conscious of the effect that we had on the environment. And one of the biggest factors in any soldier's life is water. And we were, I don't know if you want to use the term anal, but I am going to use that term about our water usage. Buffles had, I think, a 200-litre tank on them. And if you observed any other person from any other unit, whether it was an infantry unit, whether it was a mobile unit, a mobility unit, they would always just drink water out of these water tanks that were in the vehicles by putting their hands, cupping their hands under the water outlet and drinking water that way. We strictly only used our fire buckets. And our fire buckets were actually ground down to make them smaller, so we didn't overuse water. We placed the fire bucket under the tap, opened up the tap, had our drink. If we were more thirsty than that, we filled the fire bucket up again for a second mouthful of water, but we were very, very disciplined about that kind of stuff. We had very comprehensive spare parts, self-sealing for the tires, and whatever else you could think that we needed to for the vehicle, including spare engines, spare gearboxes, and the necessary jacks and things to lift the engines out of the vehicles, etc., etc. Plus a combat tiffy, vehicle mechanic. We call them in the South African Defence, also refer to them as tiffies. These people were trained to our standards. So they received a similar type of training to Joe, so they would be combat aware, and if they got into a skirmish with us, they'd be familiar with our drills and could slot in very, very easily. But their primary task was support. And they could honestly get vehicles going again in a short order. There was nothing that fazed them. We took spare axles with, we took spare shafts with, whatever we needed to keep our vehicles going, independently of any other SADF support we had. And I think it would be fair to say that we had seen what Kufut had done. And we modelled, I think, that on Kufut. We were independently of Kufut using the same tactics that Kufut used in tracking. It just developed organically. But in the support aspect, we saw what Kufut had done and we applied it to ourselves. We had spare fuel. We took spare aviation fuel with us, and they had spare diesel, spare aviation, what we called after, it was referred to as after. We took 100-litre drums of after with us, the whole 44-gallon drum. So when we departed on an active deployment, we left with a very large convoy of vehicles. Once we had infiltrated into enemy territory, the support vehicles went into a lager at what we called the tactical HQ, attack HQ. And they remained behind at the attack HQ. If a vehicle got into difficulty and we couldn't extract it out of the combat zone, they would go in and repair the vehicle on site. So there was no need to have big tow trucks come in, go through really almost a separate mission to then extract a vehicle for repair. We could handle it independently of everybody else, and that made us highly mobile and gave us a huge advantage.
Of course, would like me to say a few words for the audience to understand the Portuguese way of saying it. 32 Battalion has a credo, and one of the credos, they have a few sayings, but our credo is loyalty, honesty and integrity, and translated into Portuguese, and this is where it originated from, is honestidade, loyalidade e integridade. And you've also, the audience would also have heard the term the terrible ones, and the translation of the terrible ones would be os terríveis. This is how the Angolan soldiers would have said it.